I'm very excited to do this podcast because
Cool. Me too, man. Yeah.
I get to speak about my favorite subject, which is fish.
Awesome.
I've been fish obsessed since I've been a little kid. I used to, in kindergarten, so that's when you're like 3-4 years old, you used to bring a reading book in. And the book that I used to bring in was a fish ID book. And I just read that all the time, and hence why I probably am where I am now, is my main job is IDing fish.
Absolutely. You are in the right job.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's cool.
And I get to speak to you today how fish evolved. This production was recorded at the podcast studios in the Media Arts Centre at Murdoch University. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Murdoch University. Any content provided by the hosts and guests are their personal opinions and are not intended to represent the views or opinions of the university, its administration, faculty, or staff. Now we have that out of the way, let's talk science. Paramount importance. Especially coral reef fish, which is,
that's right.
I've never really actually thought about it, apart from the sense when a lot of the fish books, the way that they've ordered in the book is they're from like the oldest to the newest through evolution. But that's all I really know about fish evolution. Can you talk me through that? What overall, broadly, what is it?
Yeah, right. Okay, so in terms of, fish evolution is my main kind of line of work. And you're right, like when you get these fish ID books, they're generally organized according to taxonomy. So taxonomy is just the study of naming organisms. This is like one of the most fundamental really areas of biology. We need to give things names and put them in sort of these hierarchical structure of organization, the biological organization. So ideally, these taxonomic names, they should reflect evolutionary relationships, right? So fishes belong to certain orders that have their own families, and within their families, there are genera and species within it. So it should all kind of make sense and reflect evolutionary processes that led to this organization or structure, hierarchical structure. So this is pretty much what I study, but not necessarily the taxonomical side of things. I'm more interested in understanding what past processes led to the present day patterns that we observe in nature. So that's my main driver. I want to understand why fishes are where they are. Why do you have certain places that have way more species than other places? Because where I come from, actually, it's a place that is very species poor in terms of reef-associated fishes. Right. I come from Brazil, and actually from inland Brazil. I'm not, I went to the ocean a little bit later in life, and then obviously fell in love. This is probably a common story that you hear in marine biology, but that for me was already an incredible world. When I was able to put a mask on for the first time and look at those fish, I thought, wow, this is incredible. Until I started realizing, when I started studying this more in depth, realizing that what I was seeing there was actually just a fraction of the diversity that exists in other places, like in Australia, for example. And that really got my interests. And it is a fascinating topic.
Yeah. Well, you just mentioned a few subtopics within that, which I'm going to definitely cover.
Sure.
Because, just there's so much to speak about. I'm going to start from the start, though, by going, you don't really get fossils or like ancient fish, I says, but you don't get the fossils that you get to see through paleontology of different dinosaurs or mammals and all that. How do you study fish evolution without having the physical features?
Yeah, great question. And you're right. Unfortunately, fish fossils are relatively rare. And obviously, when I say relatively, is when you compare to other groups that are better preserved. There are great fish fossils out there which tell an incredible story of fish evolution. Fishes have been around for quite some time. I would say, for 400 million years of evolution at least. But the ones that I'm interested in are exactly the species that exist today, and how did these groups originate, right? So on a relative scale, they are far more recent, and most processes that I generally talk about happened within the last 66 million years of evolution. And within that time frame, reef-associated fish fossils are indeed uncommon. There are some really great records of fish fossils within that time frame, but they are super concentrated both in time and space. So there's like this incredible fossiliferous record in Italy that dates to about 50 million years ago.
Oh, wow.
And the cool thing about this one is that it already shows a lot of the families that we see today on coral reefs appearing. So they were already present. And if you look at the rocks, fossils are essentially just, rocks with the features of fish preserved on them. And you see just incredible similarities. Like you have, for example, a few species of pomocentrids, which are the damselfishes, were already present there. You have surgeonfishes present in the rocks. And when you compare those rocks to the fishes today, it's like really, really similar. And those things were swimming around some primitive reefs, I should say, 50 million years ago, perhaps even earlier than that. But, that's, for some families, that's kind of the first record that we have.
Potentially, are they those species are still extant today, like still living?
I would say that that's a very slim chance of that being true. Like those lineages were likely extinct away, those species, because there was a lot that happened within 60 million years. But like I was saying at the start, you have this biological structure of this hierarchical structure that tells, that family. So something that looked a lot like the species that we have today on coral reefs was already present at that point. So that whole family, you can with certainty say it was already present at that point. So the species itself might have gone extinct, but that's such a valuable record to kind of calibrate our thinking around roughly when things appeared. Because if you go back to the fish fossil record before 66 million years, and soon, very soon I'll tell you why this specific date is so important. But if you go back to the record of fishes before that, the forms present were very, very different. There was a sudden change in fish forms post 66 million years ago, which coincides exactly with the time when we had our most recent mass extinction event, which drove non-avian dinosaurs to extinction, right? So this is one of the most famous, I guess, in biology, one of the most famous events that wiped out those big reptiles, out of which...
And it changed the fish's form.
It also changed the fish's form.
What were they before?
We talk a lot about the dinosaurs, but we forget about many, many other groups that were also influenced by that mass extinction event.
Like, I know this is usually an artist that's drawn it or something, but when they've drawn like pictures of the dinosaurs, like the aquatic ones, you always see little like fishes in there as well, but like never spoken about.
That's right.
What was the fish's form? Like, obviously we can only just think of like the standard fish now. So how different was a fish's form pre 66 million years ago?
Yeah. So they had general features that suggested, for example, an association with some form of reef, because the reefs were also very different. So, but nothing compared to, like, for example, the mouth morphologies that we see today on herbivorous fishes, for example. Like you get your three most classic sort of herbivorous fishes on coral reefs: parrotfishes, surgeonfishes, and rabbitfishes. There's certain types of morphology in there that indicate that those are herbivorous fishes, but there's nothing similar to that prior to 66 million years. And perhaps some forms that fed on hard substratum like reefs, so they had powerful jaws, but nothing that would suggest that they were feeding on algae or primary productivity or anything like that.
Right, so they were mainly piscivores.
There was a lot more piscivores and also some planktivorous forms of fish. That is a specific group that we know from some great work by some paleontologists that planktivores specifically suffered a lot in this transition. It's called the KPG boundary, so the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary. And so planktivores really got wiped out for some reason, made potentially massive changes in ocean circulation systems. Fishes that feed on plankton really depend on that constant inflow of plankton and
right. So that's saying that the reefs would have functioned completely different back then.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, just thinking about the foundations for reefs, they were completely different in terms of post that KPG extinction event is when we see really corals kicking in and start to form reefs. But before that, you had reefs that were formed mainly by mollusks, and some really, really weird sort of creatures that we don't see today. So these rudist bivalves that we call them, they were the main formers of reef-forming organisms prior to this.
Has there been families that survived through that period?
Of fish?
Yeah.
Not that the fossil record.
What about the coelacanth?
There is evidence of some families that survived that period, but they didn't survive up to today.
Okay.
Which is cool. So some of these weird forms that I was talking about earlier, the fossils go through that period, but then they went extinct more recently. So they're not present today.
Right. Was there another reason, like an event that's caused those?
There were a few events. One particular that comes to mind was a major cooling of the Earth around 33 million years ago. That really also drove some lineages to extinction. So yeah, there's evidence of changes. Nothing that caused a mass extinction event. Because to be able to classify these things also in biology, we use, metrics such as this needs to, for something to be considered a mass extinction event, it has to be something that's way above the average background extinction, right? Because things are going extinct at all times through evolution. This is just how nature works. So 99% of all species that have ever existed, they went extinct already. When you start thinking about this, it's just mind blowing, right? And think about all those weird forms that once existed, but then just got completely wiped out by these specific events. Like the KPG boundary was driven by a comet that hit the Earth. It's well known now and well accepted that was the major driver, but some other extinction events were driven by volcanism and CO2 accumulation, massive warming, and things like that.
Right.
So there's multiple reasons why things can go extinct, but mass extinctions tend to drive a larger proportion of taxa to extinction. That's how we define it usually.
What's the oldest living family? Is it those damselfishes and surgeonfishes?
The oldest living family, right? Yeah, that's a great question because I realize I might not have answered your first question properly because we ended up just talking about the fossils.
Yeah.
And the second element that we use, because fossils are so rare, is we use genetics, right? So genetics is an incredible tool as well to understand these relationships between lineages, living lineages, right? So essentially you just collect the tissues of living organisms, you sequence them, and that DNA tells a lot about their history, not just how some species are related to others, but also you can use tools such as the molecular clocks to try and calibrate the origin of these species or families or genera in time. So that's why having these punctual fossils, even though they are rare, they are so important because they provide these calibration for this molecular clock that we can use to then try to time the origin of things that we don't have a fossil record for. So the fossil record is an imperfect record of the whole history, and we try to fill in the gaps with what we have. And the most reliable tool today to do it is through genetics. So after having explained that, using genetics, what we've been finding more recently is that many of these families probably appeared right after or sometime really close to this event at 66 million years. Recently, I was fortunate enough, well, not so recent anymore, probably 2 years ago, to collaborate on a paper with some paleontologists from Mexico. And they started finding some really cool fish fossils in Mexico as well that are dated to be around 63 million years.
Right.
And we have, for example, another damselfish from that fossiliferous record from Mexico, which suggests that that family was already present at that point in time, right? So, and before 66, you had nothing that looked anything like a damselfish. So it must have occurred, and then using those time calibrations, those molecular techniques that I explained, I was able to suggest that, you know, the appearance of these families probably aligns very closely with this event at 66 million years.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's an old family. What's I'll go to the opposite end. What's the newest family? This is just on coral reefs?
On coral reefs, yeah. I'm focusing a lot on coral reefs here because this is what I study, and it's where most of the diversity of marine fish is, right? And this is the main reason to study coral reefs specifically. But the most recent that we know of, I would say, is probably butterfly fishes.
Oh, really?
Yes, butterfly fishes are in on the family level, they were some of the most recent families to have appeared. There's some good fossils that are dated around 30 million years.
That's still a long time
It's
ago.
a long time. Yeah. So the most recent family would be dated to be around 30, 40 million years old.
What would drive that speciation?
Yeah, so this is a hard one to answer, and it's where some of my research is focused on. What we know so far is that there was a lot of the speciation in these families was driven by ecology. Essentially, there's a massive diversification in feeding modes, for example, and the types of prey that they use. So this is one of the axes of diversification, but what then drives the richness of, you know, prey items or different modes of feeding I believe, is exactly the presence of reefs. Reefs also changed a lot through time. Their constitution, their sizes, everything about reefs changed a lot in this time. And I think that was a major driver of change.
Right.
And obviously you have more recently changes in sea level, and that is also a factor that drives species formation.
Mm. So you've looked at like how diet links to these reef fishes and their feeding mode. So when you're looking at their diet, are you looking at the specific fauna they're eating or their mouth morphologies, or I guess a combination of everything?
It's a bit of a combination of everything. And a lot of it is just driven by what we know of species today, right? And by using these molecular techniques, building their family trees, which we call phylogenies, we are able to trace back. We use specific methods to trace back in time when certain diets appeared. But this is all based on what we know today. Like I said, fossils are rare, so you can't really time precisely the origin of these diets. But based on these molecular reconstructions that we can have a good idea, a good estimation of when these things appeared. And there's more and more evidence accumulating towards showing this period that was called the Miocene. That was probably a very important time for the origin of many of the genera that we have today on coral reefs, and many of these ecologies, many of these different diets, they evolved around that time. And some of my most recent work, it's actually looking at changes in reef conditions. And it seems like this specific time on the Miocene, around 20 to 10 million years ago, a lot of things changed on reefs.
Like what?
Reefs were significantly larger in size at that point in time.
Really?
Which is interesting because when we look at global patterns of species distributions today, reef area is one of the main drivers of fish diversity, right? I like to say that reefs are essentially fish aggregating devices. And just essentially, when you think about the consequences of having larger reefs, you can kind of visualize, more potential for different ecologies and different types of fish existing in those reefs.
When you're talking about larger reefs, are you talking about area? Like say
I'm talking essentially about area. Yeah.
And just of coral reefs.
Just of coral reefs. Yeah.
Yeah, because you can get limestone reefs and all that, which is
exactly. Yeah. Well, you get a lot of fish in rocky reefs as well, but rocky reefs are non-biogenic, so they don't grow. They only occur where they occur. So here in Southwest Australia, in some places, you do some like temperate places where reefs don't grow. You get those rocky reefs, which still have the function of providing fish habitat and different fish ecologies, but they're not as diverse as coral reefs. So coral reefs are almost like a living entity that just grows in size and provides all these different types of habitat for different types of fish, small fish, big fish. And that's I think the key on why reefs are so important for fish.
Is it, so they're obviously the most diverse is coral reefs. Is there a link to that, like a lot of fish grow faster in warmer waters, so therefore they can speciate quicker? Is that like a link, or is that like why are coral reefs so diverse? Is it like, and because is it like through, this is multiple questions backing up each other, but like, is it natural selection, convergent evolution? What's
right?
Sorry.
No, there's a lot of things to unpack there, and you're right. Temperature is a major driver of biological diversity in general. right? In any system that you look at. So this is not just about marine systems. This is about terrestrial systems as well. The places where you get rainforests, for example, which are the terrestrial equivalents to the coral reefs, are also tropical. So this is known in biology for a long time. Hot places tend to accumulate more species. There's multiple reasons why that could possibly be the case. I don't think we're yet able to narrow it down to one specific mechanism, but it's likely a combination of many things, such as warmer temperatures drive faster metabolisms, and that just accelerates the speed of life, essentially. But also some warmer areas tend to be more stable over evolutionary time, and that leads to a just essentially a continuation of evolutionary lineages over time as well. So there's a few reasons why that is the case, and you're right. So when we think now going back to the coral reefs are limited to tropical areas. So there is this component about it being so diverse because it is essentially in tropical oceans and warmer waters. And there is evidence in the past that with changes in the temperature on the globe, certain latitudes that would today be considered too cold for coral reefs to grow, they in the past had coral reefs because the earth was just way hotter than it is today. So this is an interesting thing as well to think about. You know, just the latitudinal extent of coral reefs has changed over evolutionary time.
In southern Australia, I see coral down there. Usually it's only like a few species. That's not a coral reef though, is it?
No, I would say that's more like a rocky style kind of reef. In Australia, it's super interesting because researchers coined this really interesting term that's called the Great Southern Reef, which is a really great way to define what it is. It is still a reef because it's a rocky formation essentially, and in Southwest Australia and in many places around South Australia, you have like kelp forests growing, which are also places with a really good diversity of fishes, but it's very different composition when you compare to coral reefs. And they are not comparable to coral reefs in terms of diversity.
No. Is the oldest coral reefs the highest diversity? Like, is there like hotspots, dead zones? Well, not dead zones, but like lower, like the earlier coral reefs. The youngest coral reefs. Are they like the less diverse?
Yes, no, this is a really great question because what we have as evidence so far is that coral reefs that were stable over evolutionary time, they tend to have more species today. So you're right, you know, you're partly correct, but there's it's really hard to trace the age of some of these reefs, right? So
is there any known ones that's like this is the oldest reef? Or
well, to give you an example, I could say that, for example, the Great Barrier Reef, it's something super recent. Like the whole Great Barrier Reef has waxed and waned over the past 30,000 years, as far as I know, with changes in sea level, and it got to probably what it is today only within the past 10,000 years. And when you put that 1,000 years in perspective over, we're talking now millions of years, right? So many things can change. If a whole Great Barrier Reef is able to form within 30,000 years, or even less than that,
or in a whole island like Australia move away from different continents.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So that gets a good sense of the scale that we're talking about, right? So that's why it's really hard to pinpoint the ages of these things. And yeah, it's essentially trying to put together, pieces of a very, very hard puzzle with many pieces missing from it.
Yeah. So is there like signs of like where certain fish have evolved certain strategies? So you talked about the herbivorous fish evolving. Did they all evolve for the sort of similar reasons, or like what? Like, is there examples of fish finding the same, well, moving into speciating into the same feeding strategies through different ways, or?
Yeah, the herbivorous fish is a really great example because they're super diversified within coral reefs, and today is one of the main feeding modes on coral reefs. But interestingly, when you think about the spread of families that do it, it's relatively limited. So you only have like kind of 3 main families really that are herbivorous. And also they are herbivorous in very different ways. So you have parrotfishes that feed on either scraping or excavating the surface of the reef matrix, essentially. You have surgeonfishes that some feed by essentially sucking the detritus from the surface of the reef. Some are able to scrape with specialized teeth the detritus from the turf algae. So they are feeding on very different resources. Although we tend to generalize them as herbivorous fishes, we know that they are feeding on very different resources.
What about detritivores?
Yeah. Sorry, I brought that up and I didn't explain that. But detritus, it's essentially, you think about a reef, there's a lot of things decaying. There's a lot of organic matter that accumulates at the bottom of the ocean. And that starts being decomposed by, for example, cyanobacteria or other organisms. And those are the major sources of nutrition of these detritivores, essentially. So there's a whole trophic link. There's a whole feeding guild that uses these essentially decomposing things on the reef.
The most common one people would know of would be mullets.
Mullets, exactly. Yeah. They are really good example of the detritivores, but because they're not so associated to coral reefs. That's why I didn't bring them up here. They're more associated with like sandy bottoms. But yeah, you're right. Those are a great example of a good detritivore. So, in essence, you can kind of ask yourself, is this really a herbivore or not? There's reasons to classify them as such, and there's also reasons to not do so.
Yeah. How can like the fish traits and feeding modes evolve in response to environmental change and shifts? Like, is it because they just don't have that food available to them anymore?
Yeah. So one of the things that we hypothesize that has occurred with the appearance of these groups, because like I was saying earlier to you, there's not a lot of evidence of herbivorous marine fish groups prior this KPG event, 66 million years. So something must have happened that drove the appearance of these groups, right? Surgeonfishes and rabbitfishes, for example. We don't know exactly what it was, but there's this hypothesis that once you're capable of exploring a certain resource and that resource isn't utilized by other groups, you are potentially able to diversify a lot, because that's essentially an unutilized resource.
A niche. Yeah.
It's a niche, exactly, that's underutilized. So the utilization of that new niche was potentially one of the factors that meant these groups are today so successful.
Biologically, for a fish to do that though, they like their intestines, like we've just done a project where I had a student, Dylan Bennett, who looked at the morphologies of seagrass fishes.
Right.
And when we looked at the different feeding gills, so you got like piscivores, generally, different mouth shapes, jaw shapes, different like gill rakers and all that, but also the main one between, say, like a piscivore fish and a herbivore or
is
detritivore,
the size of the intestine.
Yeah,
yes.
is like the super long.
Yes,
in a herbivorous or detritivorous fish, and then it's probably like really short, I guess.
Yes.
in the opposite.
Yeah,
so for a fish, if it was changing one to the other, like how does that happen through evolution?
Exactly, and you touched on a very important point, because when you think about evolutionarily, it's probably way harder to become like a herbivore than it is when you think about all these adaptations that you need to be a fish herbivore. It's harder. So you kind of start understanding why certain resources were more utilized over evolutionary time, and it was only like perhaps more recently that the capacity to feed on these other items appeared, because these things were just so hard to evolve. But once they do, it's a very successful strategy to be in, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What about like generalists? So I know that there's species like black brim that can feed on invertebrates, fish, and also algae.
Yeah. They tend to be less common around coral reefs. I wouldn't
what
be
about
able
the
to
butterfish? Well, so it's like the western butterfish, which is Nemapteridae, the family.
Yeah, they tend to be quite generalists, but and abundant on coral reefs as well. But it usually ecological specialization it's very common on coral reefs rather than generalization, because you have so many different resources. Species tend to specialize rather than generalize. Evolutionarily, there is this hypothesis whether specialization could be an evolutionary dead end, but so far we have no evidence to suggest that from the literature.
Right.
This hypothesis mostly comes from terrestrial ecology, but there's not really a lot of support for it. So specialists do tend to be quite successful on coral reefs. So think about your butterfly fishes, for example. Some species feed on very few species of coral, and there's not a lot of other things feeding on coral reefs. Butterfly fishes are your poster child of coral feeding fishes.
Yeah.
But if you try to think of other species doing it,
Interesting. So you're saying specialist fish are more like they're more resilient, or they're more successful?
For some reason, maybe coral reefs promote specialization. That's what I'm hinting at, potentially. I'm not saying that this is the case, but it sounds like it is a place that offers many opportunities to be, and that brings us back to exactly what we were talking about. There's so many different items to feed on that you end up having these groups that are highly specialized on coral reefs rather than just being generalists and eating anything. And perhaps that's why those groups are more associated with that specific type of habitat. The generalists, you see them being a little bit more flexible in terms of habitat
they can go
usage.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Has there been a certain family or group of fishes that has like the specialization has like wowed you? And you've gone, how the hell did they evolve? Or
I do like the wrasses a lot, because they have the most diverse wrasses and parrotfishes. They are part of one family called Labridae, and they are by far the most diversified group of coral reef fishes, both in terms of ecology and also in terms of species. but you have this species that is Gomphosus varius. I forgot the common name now, but it's a species that has like a long and thin beak, and when you look at it, it looks very much like a bird, but it's just so specialized in eating small crustaceans and small little creatures that live within the reef crevices.
Oh, what's the family? Not like a boarfish or no. So
Yeah, I sorry, I completely blanked there.
Same here. What does like the role of like isolation, like remote reefs? Does that like they'll be quite old? Do they play in the evolutionary?
Absolutely, yeah. Isolation is one of the factors that generally drives what we call endemism. Endemism is just the appearance of something that doesn't occur in other places.
No, we have in Western Australia, or it's probably all of Australia, especially the southern half. We've got so many endemic fish that are not found anywhere else in the world.
Yeah. Of course, endemism is a matter of scale, right? So depending on how much you zoom in or zoom out, you get more or less endemism. So how you quantify it, it's also very variable. But for example, islands tend to be hotspots of endemism. And you're right, Western Australia is super interesting in terms of marine biodiversity because there's a lot of endemic stuff around here. One that comes to mind is the Balchin grouper.
Yeah,
is endemic to the WA, and there's a few others. Yeah, so yes, isolation is an important factor.
How do coral reef communities differ functionally across the world? And does that say anything about the resilience of them?
Right. Yeah, no, another great question. And there has been quite a lot of global studies that were performed recently because we are so lucky to be at this stage of research that we've accumulated quite a lot of data on species distribution globally on coral reefs. But what we see is that generally there is a basic foundation, functional foundation for every reef that you go to globally, right? I could say that there is like 12 or 13 families of fish that you will most likely see in every reef you go around the world, regardless of whether you are in the Caribbean or in the Indo-Pacific, they will be there. Which tells you, already gives you a bit of a hint on where I'm getting at. You know, it's functionally, you do have this basic composition. What really differs between these reefs globally is the amount of species that you have performing each one of these functions. So Indo-Pacific reefs, which are by far the most diverse ones globally, they have a lot more species and a lot more redundancy in a way of the functions that exist elsewhere.
Can we just mention what type of functions? So what is a function?
That's that's a really tough question to put in perspective, but I'll try to simplify it and bring it back to our traditional herbivores, you know. So when we define a function on coral reefs, we're trying to talk about something that has relevance energetically. So, for example, a herbivore so you know what it feeds on, and you know how much it grows, for example, and what size it usually attains. You know, combining these three things, and there's many other things that we use to define a function. But just to give you a quick kind of demonstration, this would be the function, right? So combining these elements like feeding yield, growth, and maximum size. right? Combined, they would tell you, oh, this is a large, fast-growing herbivore, something like that. So generally, you have the basic combinations pretty much everywhere of fish. You have tiny fish that grow super fast that are these cryptobenthic fish that we call them, all the way. So from that all the way to large herbivores and large carnivores going through intermediate sizes that feed on invertebrates around the reef. Right? But the fascinating thing is that when you compare the Atlantic with the Indo-Pacific, for example, they've been isolated for a very, very long time. And yet, when you're just thinking about family level differences, you see pretty much almost the same families. There are some families that are exclusive to the Indo-Pacific, but basically you do get most of the families that occur in the Indo-Pacific, you also get in the Atlantic.
Why would that be? Is it needed because you're needing all these different functions for an ecosystem to survive?
I think it's more the other way around. It's because the system is itself relatively similar everywhere you go. You tend to get the same things occurring in them. So you're more talking about a kind of top-down perspective. I'm more talking about a bottom-up perspective. You know what is around reefs is there because the reefs kind of attract them to be there. But then there's the limitations in terms of dispersal, right? A Indo-Pacific fish would not be in an Atlantic reef unless humans bring them. Is the case of the lionfish, for example.
Yeah, well, I've even seen that down in temperate reefs now as well. They're moving down here.
Right.
So, we tried getting a project up a few years ago looking at them because obviously everyone's seen what's happened in the Bahamas, that they're very aggressive piscivorous fish just when they can breed quickly and just wipe out fish communities. But I'm not going to go.
But funny enough, they're not so abundant in the Pacific, right? And that's something that's very common in biological invasions. Usually, you get these species that are not so common in their native range. Their native range, they're obviously limited by their native predators and all of that. And then, as soon as they get put in this new environment that's completely absent of predators and other sorts of limitations that exist in their native range, they just explode. They boom and dominate the system. You know, cane toads are the same thing. They come from where I grew up in Brazil.
Yeah, well, that's when they call opportunistic species.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, for example, for people locally, like bluefish, when you take away certain trophic levels or functional fish, then they can really fill that niche and explode.
Yeah.
Why is it important to understand fish evolution, and what are the implications for it?
Right. Yeah. No, that's always a good one, and it's an important to think about because I obviously study this because I love it, but fundamentally, this is what biology is about, right? Evolution. There's this geneticist Tomasius Dobzhinsky that said that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution, and this, rings true, of course, today. And to put it in perspective, like, why do we conserve species, and how are we able to assign species to, say, what is the distribution of a species? To be able to answer that question, which is a question that has a relevance for conservation, we need to know what are we talking about in terms of species, right? So we need to understand, how did that species form in the first place? When we talk about conserving a species, we're talking about conserving a whole evolutionary lineage that carries with it a history of formation. So we should never forget in biology and in conservation biology specifically that our most fundamental unit of conservation is an evolutionary unit, is a species that is defined based on principles of evolutionary biology. So that's a first answer to your question. And, you know, the second one is just purely based on curiosity. I think there's a lot of room for curiosity-driven research. Why do we study dinosaurs? You know,
True.
as humans, we have this innate curiosity, and it's just so interesting. It's not everybody. I get it. Not everybody would be interested in fish evolution or dinosaurs, but as kids, most kids that you ask, they're gonna be fascinated by dinosaurs much more than they are fascinated about accounting.
Yeah. yeah. No,
or economics or whatever,
yeah.
you know.
Well, I guess if you don't explore the unknown, you're never going to find anything new. Either.
Exactly.
So
exactly. And trying to make sense of who we are, where we are, and how do we place ourselves in this world. I think it gives you, studying evolutionary biology really gives you this broader perspective that maybe the only other field that I can see also getting that perspective is when you study cosmology or something like that. You know, it puts you in a place of humbleness in terms of knowing that we're just a part of a whole system and we're just the tip of the iceberg. It's, you know, there's no reason for us to think that we're so special.
When we're going back, I'm going to go back to your research. You said your research is focused around coral reefs because they are the most diverse. Can we learn things from temperate reefs and like different types of habitats? Like, why are we not looking at like just sandy habitats? Because obviously you get a coral reef in warm temperate areas, but you also get seagrass and you also get sand. Why are we not looking at those?
No, that's a fair question, and I want to make it very clear. I have nothing against other systems. I just study coral reefs because I do like them and because they're super diverse. But there's value in studying all of these systems. So, for example, to be able to get the insights about what we're talking earlier, the differences in temperature and how temperature potentially drives evolutionary processes, you have to compare warm environments with more cold and temperate environments as well. So there's no point in just studying coral reefs as a separate entity if you don't understand the whole, right? There's a lot of cool things that we can study focusing just on coral reefs, but it's very important to have this perspective, especially knowing that some of the species that occur on coral reefs, they are connected through other systems as well. You know, their life cycle happens and it's dependent on the presence of either mangroves or seagrasses, like you mentioned. So understanding this seascape connectivity between these things, it's super important because otherwise you're just focusing on one part of the life cycle of those species. And it's something I try to do as well in my work, although, you know, the focus is on coral reefs. I try not to.
I don't know why I didn't ask this question earlier, which should make more relevance, but how many families of fish are there on coral reefs?
Ooh. Well, first of all, there's no taxonomic exclusivity for being a coral reef family. Even the most coral reef associated families that you can think of will have species that occur in other habitats. So I'll give you the example here of the butterfly fish family, Chaetodontidae. There's a whole clade within Chaetodontidae that is like a deep water adapted. So they don't occur on coral reefs at all. They occur in these like really different types of habitats.
Would
right?
that mean their ancestors maybe come from the deep reef
Potentially, yeah.
onto the reef?
Potentially, there is this suggestion that some of the groups, like parrotfishes, for example, you see some of the lineages that were the first lineages to diverge, they tend to be more associated with other habitats like seagrasses and potentially mangroves. So maybe coral reefs were the place where they diversified the most, but it wasn't necessarily the origin of these.
I'd imagine if we went back to 66 million years ago, the habitats less affected would be the deep ocean. No?
Potentially, in terms of stability.
Yeah.
There is this hypothesis, the deep sea hypothesis of colonization, that off the top of my head, I'm remembering one specific study that looked at corals and found potentially evidence for that, the deep sea being a potential evolutionary source of lineages to more shallower water environments. But, these things are really hard to tease apart, just having the data that we have at hand.
We're talking about data. You deal with global distributions, massive data sets, complex modeling. What's your process of putting it all together and understanding it?
Yeah, this is definitely where I spend most of my time, just trying to make sense of a lot of data. And
what kind of data are you looking at? Like what is it like?
Well, to start with, I use a lot of these phylogenies that I mentioned, which are essentially these family trees. But think about a phylogeny of reef-associated fishes that, I didn't give you a number when you asked me how many families, but there are at least, off the top of my head, 60 families that I can think of that have species that associate with coral reefs. Right? So that already gives you kind of an idea. We're talking more than 3,000 species of fish. Perhaps, if you just use the narrow definition of coral reefs, we're talking around 4,000 species. But if you broaden that a little bit to reef associated species, so in that case, not just coral reefs, but also like rocky reefs and things like that, we're talking about like 6,000 species, right? So a lot of my work is essentially trying to find data for these 6,000 species. So when you're classifying species according to what they eat, that's one example that I can mention. One of the things I did during my PhD, which took a lot of time, was exactly going through online data sources to try to define the trophic guilds of over 6,000 species of fish, which can be quite daunting, but it can be quite fun a lot. You learn a lot by doing these things.
I've done similar things before.
Great.
Yeah, when we're in the estuarine work, where we have to put them into feeding guilds and everything. We look at through trophic levels, not just numbers of species or whatever.
Yeah.
It's looking at those functional differences, which you got to get that through feeding, size,
exactly,
all that kind of stuff.
And we're so lucky in the fish world that there's so many good data sets available online. Like I can mention FishBase as one of the examples. Every fish person has relied on FishBase for something, at least in their work.
Yep.
So it really goes to show the value of assembling these large data sets and making them publicly available, right? Because people have different ideas on what to do with that data, and if you have them available, you're just allowing for those ideas to flow freely. I'm very thankful that I had access to some of these data.
Yeah. So how do you go about compiling it? Or sorry, not compiling, that's compiling what we just talked about, but like running it through a model, and then what do you look? I guess you're gonna have a specific question you want to test.
That's right. Yeah.
What kind of questions are you like testing?
Yeah,
Or-
generally the scientific work is always
Yeah.
question driven. So the specific questions I try to tackle are, for example, the stuff that you've asked earlier. Were there certain groups that diversified faster than others? Were there specific trophic yields that showed a signal of faster speciation? And some of the models I use a lot are called phylogenetic comparative methods. They rely on the structure of the phylogenetic tree, so on the structure of this family tree, to be able to calculate some of these metrics of diversification, for example. So some of the models I run are entirely reliant on having a good phylogenetic hypothesis about the relationship between species, and based on that, the model is able to tell you things like how fast certain groups evolved compared to others. But also, I use a lot species distribution modeling. So if you try to think about one species now, where it occurs in the globe. Certain species are super restricted, like when we were talking about islands in isolation, but some species are super widespread. And having a good idea about what happened to drive these differences in distributions is another thing that I'm super interested in, and it relies again on distribution modeling, habitat suitability for these species, and all those things that are super relevant again for conservation and future modeling of future scenarios of species distributions, all those kinds of things.
Right now, are we in the most specious time, or is it?
It is a great question. It is a great question because the way that a lot of our evolutionary thinking is taught in schools, I don't think it's correct necessarily, because it makes us think that evolution is this progressive process that always leads to more complexity, more species. And even the way that phylogenies are structured, it kind of makes you think that that is the case. But the answer to your question is probably not. I would not be able to tell you, oh, this was the most diverse time that Earth has ever experienced. But there's nothing as well to suggest that currently we're living the most diverse period of evolutionary history. And the reason for that is exactly now going back like super old things that happened 500 million years ago. There is good fossil evidence that there were forms and shapes and types of organisms that occurred back at that time that went extinct in one of those mass extinction events and never reappeared again. So how are you able to compare these things? These punctuated events really drive a lot of the history of life on Earth, which is, cool to think about, but also, again, puts you in a position to question our preconceived ideas in terms of perhaps there were some periods of time in the past that were more diverse than today. Perhaps the Earth was potentially warmer, which meant more tropical areas available for species. And if tropical areas are the most diverse areas in the globe for terrestrial and marine organisms, potentially.
Yeah, but that would make sense, right?
It would make sense, for sure.
Is there a point in time that you wish you could go back into?
Absolutely. Yes.
When?
I would love to be able to go diving in Miocene reefs. So Miocene is this period that I was talking about between the Miocene itself. It's between 23 and 5.3 million years ago, but specifically between 20 and 10 million years ago uh, is the period of the Miocene that I would love to go diving because my current work suggests that, and work by a lot of other great researchers before me suggests that that was the most important period for reef fish diversification. And exactly because I was telling you about all those big reefs that formed at that time. So if I could go back in time, if I had this magical machine,
Yeah.
that would be the place for sure. And if my hypothesis is true, potentially that was a more diverse time.
Yeah.
In terms of marine
I
species.
think there's a lot of evidence to back that hypothesis up with saying with the way everything.
We are starting to accumulate more and more.
With is there a family of fish that has gone extinct that you wish was still around?
That's a good one. I don't know. I think I'm interested in the living things.
Yep.
I know a lot of people that are, they do study these like really primitive fish that existed, 300, 200 million years ago. I find them really cool and fascinating, but my fascination came from first seeing the fish on the reef and then trying to trace their history rather than seeing those primitive fish and trying to understand their history, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
It's more of a, hey, what's your story?
Yeah. Yeah.
What can you tell me, or more specifically, what can your DNA tell me? And do you have any potential parents in the fossil record?
Yeah. If you like when you're dealing with, I guess, evolution, everything like that, maybe not so much these days, but definitely a long time ago, it was hit with a lot of resistance. Is there still that out there now? Is it like, has any of your ideas come across and they go, no, that's wrong? Or like,
not so much. I was lucky enough that, within the scientific world, many of these ideas are generally well accepted. There's a framework through which biology works, and you mentioned natural selection earlier, and this is the foundations of biology, right? So not really, but I do see that in certain places there's still a lot of resistance against these ideas, but I tend not to focus too much on that because the evidence backing it's not there. So, science is a method. There is it's the only falsifiable thing there is, right? We're not saying these things are true. We're open to being questioned, and this is how science progresses actually, is by looking at ideas that came before us, and with the accumulation of more evidence, if you support that, that's great, but if you don't, that's also great, because so where should we then focus our attention to find out what's going on, if not that what we used to think before, right? So I do love this process of continuous accumulation of evidence to support a certain idea, and I like to think that I'm open to anyone coming to me and saying you're wrong about this, and I would be more than happy to discuss the reasons why and think about potential alternatives.
Mm. If you, I would imagine you would have. Well, you said you do a lot of time on the computer, but you would have done a lot of field work as well.
I did. Yeah. It's not the main part of my research. I'm trying to have a little bit more of a fieldwork component added to it, but I did go to.
Has there been some like absolutely amazing places that you've been to, and on the opposite end of that scale, has there been some like times where, well, I guess this could even happen in the lab. Has there been like some big failures along the way as well?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like I think at the end, it always comes down to expectations. And I believe that my expectations were always very low given where I come from. I was happy about the Brazilian reefs before I came to Australia. Those were incredible places. That's exactly where I learned where to dive and how to dive. And though that was my first school into reef fishes. What are reef fishes? Like I was telling you, we're there in the Atlantic, perhaps one of the poorest places in terms of species richness of reef-associated fishes. But still, some of the main families are still there. So I learned those families early on when I was doing my master's there, and I was diving in places that were the southern limit of tropical species distributions. And I would still find that fascinating. If you go there, someone from Australia and someone that's very used to diving in tropical places would probably not find those dives the most thrilling ones. But at that point in time, that was my baseline. And I think that was very important for me because it created a baseline in terms of what those systems can be. And then I moved on to being very fortunate to come to Australia and be able to dive in places like the Great Barrier Reef, and Ningaloo Reef more recently. But if I could point out one specific place, I would say probably Lord Howe Island was one of the most fascinating places I've been.
That's not tropical, is it?
No, and that's it is another one of those transition zones. I always find a lot of interest in these transition zones because they get a mix of everything. So back in Brazil, I was right in a transition zone between tropical and extratropical environments. It was very like rocky reefs, almost no corals growing there. Whereas Lord Howe is also in the transition zone, but in a much more diverse sort of background, if that makes sense. So Lord Howe combines there's still a lot of tropical species that occur there. And for people that don't know, Lord Howe is an island off the the east coast of Australia. And it's fascinating because it's very isolated and also in this temperature transition between tropical and temperate systems. So it combines the best of both faunas and also a lot of endemism. So most of the fishes that you see there will be kind of unique to either Lord Howe or at least, a few islands around that area. And then you get endemic clownfish right next to some temperate species like morwongs or things like that. And I just thought that was super fascinating.
I can kind of relate. I just came back from Abrolhos Islands last month, and seeing the mix of like tropical species in there with temperate species, I was just like, this is crazy.
It is crazy. Funny you say that because I also just came back from the Abrolhos 2 weeks ago. So
really?
How did we not bump into it?
Yeah.
It is a big area.
It is, yeah.
But that is that would be probably, not very far in my list of super interesting places. So Abrolhos would be potentially the equivalent on the west coast to Lord Howe on the east coast. Abrolhos is a little bit less isolated than Lord Howe on the
it's
east
a lot
coast.
further out.
Yeah. But it's equally fascinating. Exactly, yeah. So you've been to the Abrolhos, you've seen sea lions swimming on top of acropora corals.
Yeah.
You know, like staghorn corals, which are typically very tropical, and sea lions are typically very temperate.
Yeah.
So yeah, those transition zones are, from an evolutionary perspective, I think where magic kind of happens.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, you get all sorts of weird creatures, and yeah, super fascinating.
Before I ask you about certain failures or moments that were not that too great, has there been a discovery that you're like most proud of?
I'm pretty happy about where I'm getting at in terms of the accumulated evidence for this specific point in time that I mentioned, the Miocene, in terms of the importance for reef fish evolution. And this is some of my most recent work, but not because it is a particular discovery, like I didn't have an eureka sort of moment. It's more about the accumulation of evidence all pointing towards the same direction, which makes me very excited to, be able to, sounds like I'm really finally being able to put many pieces of this puzzle together, and they all, it seems to fit.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, in a way, that's a eureka moment. You're like,
absolutely. I'm just saying that, people at home
saying.
probably think about these like scientific eureka moments that you're in the shower and I just came up with this magical formula, but that's not usually how it goes. I think I'm very happy about that, but also very cognizant about, there's so much work that was done before me, and I'm so grateful to have worked with some of the most brilliant minds, I think, in specifically coral reef ecology. Of course, big shout out to my PhD supervisor here, Professor David Bellwood, which influenced most of these ideas.
Well, that's a whole big YouTube channel.
That's it. Yeah.
And I see in other YouTube channels using a lot of the work of the videos from there as well. And then, that name is most marine scientists would know.
Yeah, exactly. And some of the conversations I'm having here with you were conversations that we would have for hours and hours in his office. And it's just incredible, I guess, when you come across other people that have similar interests and, you are able to discuss these things, and it really puts everything in perspective. It's great. So going back to your question, if there's something I think I'm very proud of, rather than just a discovery or anything like that, it's more about the connections that were made throughout this journey, because being a scientist is a journey. It's a journey that takes long, but you meet so many great people along the way. It's totally worth it because of that. Just having the chance to chat with interesting people and
Well, that's why I love doing podcasts so much. It's the excuse to chat to all these different people and different sciences as well, and learn.
Exactly.
I think that's like, if I just look at it at a personal perspective, it's like amazing. I get to speak to these super smart people and that have done all this amazing work about different topics, and it's
for sure.
Yeah.
So there you go. A little bit of a philosophical turn here.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go back to the question I asked before, and hopefully it's a one that we can laugh about. But has there been some opposite moments as to that? Has there been some times where you're going, this sucks, or like?
There's obviously hard times along the way. Right?
Yeah.
I tend to focus on the positives because that's just my nature. But there's been tough times along the way that you start questioning yourself. And those are, I guess, more frequent than they are not. But it's just a matter of whether you focus on them or not. And yeah, sometimes, for example, you're out in the field and you get not so great weather, and you're like, oh, okay, this, and now I need to go and do the work. It doesn't.
Yeah. Has anything happened out in the field? I've sunk a boat while doing field work.
I've never done anything like that, but yeah, that sounds. Maybe you can tell me about next year.
Yeah. I'll shave that one for a little bit, but yeah.
No, nothing. Well, I had with scuba diving some I guess a few scary moments, but nothing that really got close to an accident or anything. It was just right at the start when I was, not so experienced, and being distracted underwater. You sometimes even forget that you're diving with all that equipment. And I remember one specific occasion, and that was a long time ago, that I was just, setting up these GoPros underwater, and I didn't see that my mouthpiece wasn't very well connected to my regulator as I was diving. So the regulator came out, but the mouthpiece was still in my mouth.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't realize that. So because I was obviously very focused on what I was doing, and then when I went to breathe, I just swallowed a lot of water, and that did not feel good.
No.
And, you do have that kind of panic moment because you don't realize that that's happening. So
yeah,
that was a not so fun moment for me.
I've been in a very, very similar situation.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So do you know, I think it's called, well, I don't know if it's a universal term, but hooker diving, when there's a compressor on the boat down with a hose. Yeah, we used to do that recreationally. And I think we were in about 18 meters of water.
Yeah.
And wasn't the mouthpiece that came out, it was the joint, because the joins to the actual hose, which is only 50 centimeters from the mouth.
Yeah.
As I was crawling into a cave, it just pulled on that and somehow just pulled it out. And so
oh no,
it was just
18 meters.
Yeah, well, lucky back then I was doing lots of free dive, and I didn't actually suck in water. I had full mouth, and then I heard it because it pulled, I kind of yanked, and I kind of just forced myself through it, pulled it, and it pulled out, and I just heard bubbles and everything going everywhere. And so I pulled myself back out of the cave, and I looked at my mate, and he offered me his reg because we could see it was just going crazy. Yeah. And I said, oh, no, I'm going to the surface. So I just swam to the surface. But yeah, it could have ended completely different.
Exactly.
Well, but,
and those moments, I think, are important. We're both lucky people that these things happened in a way that we were able to get out of it, obviously. I was in only 6 meters of water at that point. So even though you kind of panic when you realize, oh yeah, there's not a lot of water above me, so I can just go back to the surface. But it makes you at least pay a little bit more attention to the things you're doing. And then run into potentially less risk down the road. After that, I don't think I've ever had any other near misses underwater.
If you had unlimited time and money, what is your dream project?
That's a really good one, and I think I'll answer that by linking. I think I would do exactly what you're going to do tomorrow.
Yep. Well,
hop on a sailing boat.
Yeah.
And just sail around, studying fish in as many interesting places as possible. I know you are going to French Polynesia tomorrow.
Yes. Yeah.
Lucky man.
This episode's going to come out a bit after it, but
okay, so you can tell some of the stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, that's a bit of a dream.
Yeah.
Just be able to to sail around.
So there's probably
interesting
all
places.
these still coral reefs that are so unique with, I definitely know new species are out there. I found a new species of fish. There's other new species, but I'm sure there's like, do you reckon there's new families undiscovered?
Well, it depends on how deep we're talking, right? If we're just talking about
reefs?
coral reef, unlikely.
Yeah, it is unlikely, isn't it?
Maybe some smaller fish, super habitat associated in specialists.
Is there still like gaps in the phylogeny?
There's lots of gaps. Yeah, for sure. Like
So
if I could, I would collect tissues of every living species of fish in the world to be able to have at least a complete sort of phylogeny.
Yeah.
But also out of interest, out of seeing what each one of these species is doing, and to have that broad perspective. Like I was saying, coming from Brazil, you see reefs, you see how they work, and you see that those same families there. And then you go to a place that has 10 times more species, and then you see kind of the same things, but what are the things that are not the same? And you only get that perspective when you look across this kind of gradient of species richness, I guess, or diversity. Yeah, so to be able to, a lot of the things I talk about, in a lot of the places I talk about, I've only read about them. I haven't been. So
I think there's huge value in going to and seeing these places. Like you learn so much with like visual interpretation instead of like a video or.
That's absolutely where the best ideas usually come from. When you're out in the field and hopefully trying to think like a fish.
Yeah.
Is that sort of yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in today. This has been
my pleasure.
An amazing conversation. I love speaking fish, and your research is so fascinating.
Thank you.
And I'm very much looking forward to hearing more of it, and also looking at Lucas's work. I remember speaking to him a fair bit at ECU, and he's your student. But yeah, that stuff's so fascinating. So yeah, really looking forward to where this is going, and thanks again for coming here.
Cool. No, thanks. My pleasure. And it was awesome chatting fish again.